Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics, back with a year in words. This time is for December, and who doesn't love Christmas? I think it's my favorite time of the year, and this time we get to learn 2 blocks. Hey, if you're part of our Year in Word Wall Hanging Club, again, I'm so glad you got your spot. Those sold out so quickly. We do have just a few kits left over, so if you're maybe watching this and maybe you didn't get your spot in the club and you want to make your project out of the exact same fabrics, be sure to grab the kit. As you know, all the applique always pre-fused and laser cut for you, so you can jump right into the fun. And of course, all the fabrics that you need for the piecing, the backgrounds, even the backing, the binding are included, and we have some fun little buttons included on this one that we have here as kind of our little berries coupled up with our holly applique. So we do have a free download. Maybe you just want to learn how to make the Christmas tree block and the gift block. That's fun. Be sure to grab that free download. And if you haven't already subscribed, I want to encourage you to do that. We're releasing new videos at least once a week, sometimes more often. And that's also where we're letting you know about some of our newest kits that we're releasing on what's called a reserve. So let's jump into this one. Some precise cutting needed, some precise piecing needed, but it's worth it. Makes this wall hanging really fun. So inside our pattern, one of the things that we've included in our kit this time is a cutting diagram. There's times when you can just kind of cut that fabric and there's plenty of extra fabric left over, no matter how you cut that. This time we wanted to be sure that you cut that precisely the way we have this laid out. That way you have ample fabric to complete the project. Once you have that main background cut out for your applique, of course you could do that part first, appliquing everything down, and of course we love to use our light box as well as our applique pressing mat to make that registration just perfect, and then iron everything down. And if you haven't already picked up the Year in Word wall hanging thread set to be able to stitch down the applique, there's some limited amounts of the thread sets remaining as well. Be sure to grab that. But our focus today will definitely be on the piecing. So we'll start off with our fabric being cut to, I believe it's a 6 by 9. Let me confirm that measurement. Certainly we'll be having that in our download. Don't worry about writing anything down at this point. Just be sure to grab that download. Of course, if you're getting the kit, your pattern will be included. Yes, we're cutting those tree block backgrounds to a 6 by 9. It's a pretty cool technique that we use to create this block. That's what the block looks like from the back. Let me show you how we got there. So we have our fabric, of course, everything is pressed out well. We want to do that before we're cutting that to the 6 by 9. We'll start off with folding our fabric in half, the lengthwise, and giving it a good crease. That's going to be our beginning of where we're going to draw a line both down to the left, bottom left corner as well as the bottom right corner. And we're going to be cutting on those lines. So we want that to be quite precise. I might even put just a little press in that because I don't want to miss that spot. And if you want even more insurance, by all means, you can just mark that ever so slightly. So I'm using my 6.5 by 12.5 Creative Grid ruler, making sure that I am precisely right into that corner. This one is very much about precise piecing. You'll be wanting to use a fresh blade in your rotary cutter. Grab your patchwork pins. This is about precise piecing and a very accurate quarter seam allowance to accomplish this block. By the way, for the green holly, you're going to be doing really the same technique here, and for the green you are going to be cutting, it's a slightly different size, a 5.5 by 8.5 inch rectangle, but doing the same process, folding it in half to find the center. A little bit maybe harder to see on the green. You might want to mark that with your friction pen, and again marking that point from the exact midpoint down into those corners. Then you'll use your ruler, and I can certainly grab my spinning mat at this point. I don't want to disturb my fabric. I can't recommend a spinning mat enough. If you haven't invested in it yet, just do it. You're going to find, especially when you're going to square up certain blocks, an accuracy because you don't have to move the fabric. You can rotate yourself around that project versus you having to lift it up. and put it back down. So I'm just going to rotate that, and now I don't have to lift anything up. And I'm not making a dangerous cut back toward myself or under my arm. I've seen way too much of that on the internet. And I've been certainly guilty of doing it myself, that temptation of just this once. That's kind of how accidents happen, to be honest with you. Don't do it at all. And I'd love to encourage you to invest in the spinning mat, not only for accuracy, but obviously safety, as I just mentioned. For the cream kind of grunge Seeing Stars fabric that is here, this portion is now set aside and not used for this project. For the green that you're cutting, it's just the opposite. We're keeping the center of that, and then the sides are going away. So we now have our 3 pieces. Moving on to our pattern here, we're going to be placing piece A right up in that corner. Anytime you're sewing kind of this type of situation, you're going to have a long extension back here, and you'll have this point. It's very tender, basically, when you take this to the sewing machine, because these points tend to want to dive inside, basically the hole that's in this plate. For that reason, when I go to the sewing machine, we're going to be using something called a starter strip. I want to get the machine tracking, moving forward, and then I'm going to scoot right into that with my fabric, trying to reduce the chances of allowing this tip to dive into this hole. So let's head over to the machine. I can show that to you a little bit closer in more detail. Then it's easier to explain at the sewing machine. This right here, and some presser throat plates have a wider gap. Some of them are wider to accommodate a zigzag. If your machine has the ability to take this one that is much smaller, change it. That's why I'm using this one here. Plus, but still, that thread has a chance, or this fabric has a chance to dive into that. So we'll start off with our starter strip, and then I'm going to come in right after that to try to not allow any chance for my machine to eat that fabric. You've got bias here, so hold steady. One thing I realized as I was sewing, and I've got this bias edge, of course. Bias, I'm just going to show you how stretchy that is. I mean, I'm not, you can see this arcing over. Anytime you know you're going to be cutting and you're going to be sewing with bias, I should have recommended to you right away to be adding sizing to the fabric, plenty of it, before you're even cutting these fabrics to the 6 by 9 inch rectangle. Anytime there's sizing inside a fabric, it helps stabilize it and reduce the stretch, which is what you want at this point, to try to reduce that. Now we're going to press to the outside. We're not going to do any of this swishing, we're not ironing, we're truly pressing at this point. Otherwise we could distort this edge. We need that to be as straight as possible. So I'm going to be a little more delicate, a little more deliberate about pressing and not this twisting that I am absolutely guilty of doing at times. Now, once that's done, we will copy that on the opposite side. Now what makes this one, I've got a little bit of that little dog ear. I want to clean that off. I want to see exactly where I should be lining up. And of course, now I've got to sew from this side. So I need to turn this around, and we'll kind of start sewing where we see that. Lots of opportunity again for that fabric to want to dive in to the machine, no matter what machine you're using. It's certainly just a part of sewing that you just have to be aware of. I will again start off with a starter strip to help mitigate that as much as I can. But in a way, because this tip is in my way, I almost can't even, it's almost not, let me just cut that thread here. See how that's very difficult. Like, how do I now start that when I don't want to start sewing out here? I kind of want to start sewing right here. Let's see what we can do here. Real world quilting scenario, right? How do I manage that? I think the main thing is to just be almost coming onto the project, and even if you have to back up a touch so that there's no chance for the fabric to dive in. Let's try that. Let's back up a little few stitches. And maybe that's what smart people do, I don't know. I'm still learning too. So let's once again press to the outside. Here's the great news. We get to square this thing up. I love that. That's another reason for a spinning mat. Anytime I can square a block up, it's a grace that I get, that my sewing doesn't have to be perfect, because it really very rarely is. And so now we have this, of course, it needs to be squared up. And we are going to square that up to 4.5 by 6 3/4. There isn't a ruler I own that's 6 3/4. Of course, we'd be using something that is at least, you know, that width or larger. But I do have rulers that are 4.5. So for that reason, I think that's very obvious to at least square up the sides first. And with 4.5 inches wide, 2 1/4 will be where, let's start off with 2 1/4. You see that white line on this Creative Grid ruler? I want to show this to you. This white line right there is the exact center of this ruler, as is this one right here, and there's the bullseye. So if we're squaring this up to 4.5 widthwise, all we need to do is line that white line up. Just like that. We could certainly fold this in half if we want to find the line at the bottom as well. I like precision. You probably like that too, right? We just want our blocks to come out. That's all we're after. And these types of additional steps we can take to help line up accurately should increase that. So that line is going from here, and I've got a crease right in the bottom right there, that I now believe I'm at the right spot. I certainly don't want to move that thing right now, so I'm going to move my fabric. I don't want to lift up that fabric. I don't want anything to move right now. I'm going to need that starter strip. Okay, 6 3/4. Notice something inside the pattern here. By the way, you want to use your own fabrics and you make the wall hanging? Fabulous. We certainly have this available as just a pattern, and full-size layout diagrams are included as well. We always want to be able to trim up a block from all 4 sides. So don't put the ruler at the top and then just square up the bottom. Scoot this down so that we can, see that 1/4 inch right there? We know in order to have this block come out, we need that dashed line to be right there. So that way when we're sewing this into that point goes right into the bottom of the gift. So you can't just be anywhere you want to be on this first cut. It needs to be a 1/4 inch above that point. And from there, that's where you're going to measure your 6 3/4. So let's go ahead. Looking at our ruler here, let's see what we've got. So that's 6. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 right there. That is my 6 3/4. This is going to come out beautifully. And now that will be ready to be sewn into our project. You'll repeat that for a second time. Now for our gift block, let's focus on the gift block. Actually, we have the bottom of our block. So let's talk about that real quick. Super straightforward compared to what we've just done. That's so easy. You just, of course, have your bottom portion here. You have your 2 rectangles and your piece in between. Simply sew those together, and then we press to the outside, and then we just sew those together here and pressing toward the bottom. Very intuitive how to sew the block together. Let's talk about the gift. I want to introduce a tool to you that you maybe have never used before, and that's the corner clipper. Let's talk about the bottom of the gift because again, it's so simple, so intuitive. Let's go for that easy part real quick. Just 2 rectangles again, gold in the middle, just like here. You're sewing them together and we just pressed toward the red. Upper portion of the gift, maybe there's a little bit more going on, of course. So here's the fabrics that are on the upper portion of the gift here. Basically, you can see that looks like a flying geese. How we would have learned, probably you learned probably the same way that I did, was to just draw the line and place that in that corner, sew on the drawn line, and then flip. So let's look at that here. I want to definitely do that technique with you. Maybe you're new to quilting and you don't even know what I'm referring to. If that is true, then welcome. I love that. I love being able to share this wonderful world of quilting with new people. So I'm going to show you the traditional technique of how to do that. And then on the other side, I'm going to introduce a new tool by Creative Grid. I love it. Increases accuracy and speed. So let's go ahead and just sew that straight on the line. And you'll be pressing this to the outside. I like to press to the outside before I trim anything away. Let's say I sewed too shallow or too deep, and now this isn't flush with the edge. I seam rip it and do it again. But if you've already cut it away, if you've already cut this away, it makes it more difficult because now this edge is bias, and now you're starting to remove something and sew it back on with bias. That's not usually very helpful or desirable. So I'm going to just trim it now. I'm happy with what I'm seeing. So I have half of my top done. Other side, I can absolutely repeat the same process, drawing the line, sewing on the line, and flipping. And if that's the technique you like, I would choose that technique. But I want to show you what is another really fun option. I use it frequently anytime I'm really doing this technique in the corner. We know it's this side that's going to be, we would sew on this line, and this is the side discarded. It's called a corner clipper. And as you can see, it makes a variety of sizes. If we understand that this is what we would sew on and that's what's to be discarded, we will lay our corner clipper on here like this. You can see we've got our diagonal guidance. I'm lined up here and here. Now, there is no drawing at all. I'm simply trimming away now and going to sew. So we'll still sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to start with a starter strip. I missed that in my last one. So let's press that, and look at that. It's wonderful. I love the corner clipper. Once you get comfortable with the orientation of, okay, where do I lay this thing down? And you make the trim. Now your only job is to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you have this beautiful edge. And then you don't have to then go back and trim up. So I think the corner clipper is a great investment. One of my favorite tools for sure, one of my top 5 favorite Creative Grid tools, along with the Flying Geese tool, Trim Tool Duo, all those are my favorites. All right, now of course you would add your side pieces on. Right side together, sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. 1/4 inch seam allowance, we press to the outside, of course, because this is where the bulk is. We're always going to press away from that. Once that's done, that will be placed right side together with the bottom of your gift, and you can see that nice point right there is what you're going to be sewing your 1/4" seam allowance through, and that's what makes the point come out so nicely. Of course, you're making 2 of those as well. Once you sew the tree, the tree and the gift together, you're going to want to measure that distance. We had you oversize your applique background, just like we've been doing all along in all of the Year in Word wall hangings. Whatever that pieced unit is, that's what you'll be trimming the applique background to, joining those 2 sections together, of course, and then pressing toward the applique unit. And you'll be on your way to going ahead and finishing up the project as you wish. Maybe you're going to be sewing that on your own sewing machine. So I hope you enjoyed learning how to make the tray block, the gift block, and again, if you haven't already subscribed, be sure to do that and let a friend know as well. It's always fun to share the good news of free tutorials, always free tutorials 24/7 at your convenience. So I'll see you soon on another Year in Words wall hanging. This time it's coming up January. See you for that video.